Do your end users always, and I mean always, without exception, work on company owned devices and IT approved apps? I didn't think so. So, my next question is, how do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices? 1Password has an answer to this question: Extended Access Management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device because it solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. Check it out at securityweekly.com/1password. If your organization is ready to enhance cyber resilience, we have important insights for you. The 2024 Level Blue Futures Report sheds light on how rapid computing changes affect IT visibility. Our research reveals that while IT leaders see positive outcomes, 85% acknowledge increased risk. In this report, we identify the barriers to cyber resilience, the challenges impacting cybersecurity, and the business contexts that reveal operational issues. You'll also discover what's on the horizon and 5 essential steps for prioritizing cyber resilience. Get your complimentary copy of this crucial research today. Visit securityweekly.com/levelblue. Cybersecurity simplified. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Now for part one of the Enterprise Security Weekly news. You can check out securityweekly.com/ESW388 if you want to follow along as we go through the news or for links to the articles that we're covering. We're breaking this down into two parts. We're doing a more normal news segment, and then we'll do a more forward-looking as the next segment will be the last one of 2024. And, share our thoughts about 2024, what we're looking forward to in 2025, maybe what we're not looking forward to. We'll see where that goes. And that'll be the last segment for the year. But first, we've got the more normal news here. And I am also joined by Katie Teitler-Santullo. How are you doing?
I am well. For me, it is the last day of the working year.
Same for me. Yeah. And we also have with us Mr. Eamon Elsawa. How are you doing, Eamon?
Howdy. Got my espresso. I'm doing well.
I took down my espresso earlier before the first interview that we did today. So it is very much an espresso in the afternoon type of day.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into it here. We've got a few funding items coming through as the year rounds up. There were a lot of smaller fundings. I just selected 3 of them that I thought was interesting. Island raised a Series D from an organization in Singapore for them to focus on the Asia Pacific market. So no amount shared. Who knows how much it was? Probably wasn't the size of a full round since it's more strategic like that. But yeah, interesting to see that the enterprise browser has reached Series D. Talon already got acquired by Palo Alto, so we don't really have a whole lot of other vendors in that space to look at. I know I think CyberArk created one. We've seen a few companies kind of building this internally, but I guess it requires a lot of capital to put together a new browser, even if it is based on Chromium. And it's an interesting market. Curious, Eamon, about your thoughts on the enterprise browser market. I was kind of anti-enterprise browsers for a while. I was, anytime, partially I think because I already went through a round of this, right? Back in the early 2010s, there were a bunch of like virtualized browsers where the browser session lives in a data center somewhere. So if you get malware, it doesn't hit your laptop. And they were clunky. They broke a lot of workflows. You couldn't print from the browser, or if you could, it was weird. So it's already kind of anti building a new browser just because it's like, the chances of breaking stuff for users just seems so high.
Yeah. It's interesting, actually. Lately, I've been trying to come up with a BYOD strategy or security strategy for companies that have their own, basically allowing employees to use their own devices. And so I'm like, just issue them corporate devices. They're like, well, that's a lot of money. And then it turns out some people are not happy with that because they don't want to carry 2 laptops. Who figures? Give someone a $3,000 laptop and they don't want it. So I'm actually been looking into this a lot. So I'm coming around to it. It definitely beats the days of Citrixing into an environment. not to date myself here, but
Virtual desktops. Yeah.
yeah. So virtual desktoping into an environment. I love that concept of browser isolation. Um, there is, as a security person, you're wondering like, okay, a company is handling or kind of inspecting all this data. So like, there's some level of trust that you kind of have to let go. And so some CISOs are not happy with that, or,
Yeah.
kind of try to find the balance. Um, Turns out Cloudflare is doing some browser isolation stuff too.
Mhm.
So I'm looking to test that out.
Menlo also.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it would be good if there was, I mean, right now, the way companies are doing it is kind of like forcing people to use their Chrome enterprise browser and like use this profile, and then certificates are deployed there. And so I think it's a huge market, and with it's all along the zero trust principles as well. So yeah, I'm uh, I'm a fan of the idea.
Yeah, I mean, just what I felt kind of dumb when you mentioned, okay, like a browser's cheaper than a MacBook. It's kind of like, because one of the things I had against it was, okay, first of all, Chrome's pretty good, right? And there is enterprise controls with
Yep.
Chrome, but who wants to layer on another $60, per endpoint per person? Already you're paying for EDR and AV and all this other stuff on the endpoints. Like, I just don't see budget supporting that. But when you put it that way, when it's like, okay, maybe they can use their personal laptop and, we don't have to buy them one, then it starts, but then it gets into kind of where I thought it would go in the first place, which is not something you're going to use across the entire enterprise, something you're going to use for some of these niche cases like, temporary contractors and stuff like that.
Yeah, or customer support people. People don't need like extensive access. Where I'm trying to see how it could even be even feasible, or I mean, it's not feasible for like an engineer that has GitHub access, like full repo
Yeah.
access, or they have they're using Terraform or anything like that. So that it doesn't solve that use case.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's still to be TBD right now on that.
Yeah. Interesting. We also have on the list here Canadian-based Flare, which I think is based out of Montreal, which is where our Canadian, sometimes emergency co-host, correspondent Guillaume Ross is. So I think he knows some of these folks. And they are building a brand protection and threat intelligence platform. So interesting there, $30 million Series B, pretty good size raise there. So always interesting to see. I think another one that didn't make the list, there is a startup based out of Paris, also building basically what looks like the same thing. They described as brand protection and cyber threat intelligence. So I thought that was interesting that, sometimes you see these weird kind of regional things happening around the same time. And you got to think like, are these guys sharing some investors? Like sometimes it does feel like people are copying off each other when you see these startups pop up,
Well, they are, I think. I've certainly been in at least, now 3 different spaces, and I wouldn't say it's copying so much in air quotes as it is jumping on the bandwagon. Maybe that's just a more positive way of saying it. I think there's always some point at which certain technologies just sort of become an ugh, why isn't this here? Or, hey, if I just change this slightly, we could have something new. And again, I've been at 3 different companies where that's been the case. And once there's a good idea, all of a sudden you see 20 different vendors entering the spaces, all Gartner's hype cycle. What is the Gartner hype cycle is all about? Wow, I need your coffee, amen. This is what the Gartner hype cycle is about, right? Like, something becomes big, people aren't sure of it, it's sort of new, and then people realize, ooh, that's a really good idea. That fits in this category because of X. So everything is always a little bit of an evolution. But in certain cases, like the browser, if we go back to that, it's a return because at the time it didn't work well. And then that's when you see the copycatting or the jumping on the bandwagoning. And it's very cyclical because we like to think that we move very quickly in security, but the reality is we don't. and things like the, browser security are a
Same
good,
stuff, different attempt. Yeah.
yeah, it's a good indication of that. And, the focus on fundamentals, it's so much less fun than building a next gen shiny thing.
Yeah.
And so that's why you end up with 20 companies that do a thing, whatever that topic area is, but it's never quite codified. And then, 4 to 7, 8 years later, then it becomes an industry. And then maybe a decade later, it reemerges because it still hasn't been solved. So I do think there's a little bit of it's copycat syndrome, but also sort of that telephone game, right? And it always comes back around, and you always still have somewhat of that piece of, hey, we still haven't solved X in security yet. And that's why you start to see companies, they're like, oh, I can do it better than this company. This company came out first with security widget A. And then, all of a sudden there are 12 different companies doing somewhat of the same thing.
Yeah.
How many of them are just slapping on next gen onto it, So it's like, WAF, and now it's next gen WAF. And I'm really, like next gen espresso. Like, when are we going to have, I'm curious, what's going to be next after next gen? Next gen or AI gen?
No, it's continuous next gen. We've solved this problem.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you're always because you're continuous next gen. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, you're just always pushing that envelope, man. You're on the ragged edge all the time. So our last funding here, Sublime Security raises a $60 million Series B for, let me check my notes, electronic mail security.
What's that?
Speaking of fundamentals, speaking of basics. Yeah. Yeah. Remember, like, I know some people who still hyphenate email. I have lost the hyphen, but it does stand for electronic mail. And that makes it sound like a problem that should have been solved a long time ago. But, it's human facing technology. So therefore it hasn't. So,
yeah. I'm really excited about Sublime. So I'm actually.
We've had so many good ones. Like, I've heard good things about Sublime, Abnormal. Like there's some. It's one of the areas I hear the most positive stuff come out of people about, because in the back channels and the what's your vendor experience back channels, it's mostly all negative stuff, right?
Yeah.
But not emails.
Yeah.
So that's good. Yeah, and especially like, I remember when BEC first started to happen, I was like, man, how are they going to handle this? Like, there's no link to analyze or detonate somewhere. There's no malware to it's just, they're trying to convince your chief controller, or, CFO or whoever's moving money around to do something stupid.
And, in fact, I think it was Sublime, really early version of their website a long time ago. I think it was Sublime, one of the other ones, where they actually coined the term BEC love. Like, they actually coined a particular attack vector.
Oh, really?
Maybe it wasn't Sublime, but it was one of these like really advanced email providers. And when I was researching some stuff a few years ago, I was impressed. And a lot of people said, these guys stop everything.
Might have been Abnormal. I do vaguely remember that.
Yeah.
And so up here next, we've got, I'm sure we've all heard about the Cylance acquisition. So BlackBerry is divesting it. They are selling it to Arctic Wolf for $160 million. And I believe BlackBerry originally paid over $1 billion for it. So I did some analysis on this and found that Cylance does represent something like 60% of BlackBerry's revenue right now. Or sorry, cybersecurity represents 60% of their revenue. So they do have Ad Hoc, which is like an emergency messaging system type thing for government and for SLED. So I don't know what the split is there. They don't actually split out their different cybersecurity revenue. But yeah, it's interesting. BlackBerry last year, like a quarter or something like $500 million of the revenue was licensing, and that dropped to almost nothing between 2023 and 2024. It went from like 250 million in 2023 to like 3 million in 2024. So I don't know what happened to BlackBerry there. It seemed like they were getting money for patents or something like that, and maybe a lawsuit took that away from them. I don't know, but I mean,
it's kind
BlackBerry
of amazing that they're still around as a company. Frankly, they've had so many peaks and valleys.
They still have MDM stuff. They're still doing some like secure messaging, so some stuff around phones still. But another big piece is the automotive stuff. They have a real-time operating system called QNX that lives in a lot of cars, the infotainment system in cars.
Really?
So that's still there.
Wow.
They're still making some money off of that. And I think it's growing. So they still have stuff.
In the cybersecurity space, though, it seems to me like maybe they're pivoting away because they can't seem to get it quite right. You know what I mean? I don't know anything about the automotive software, but maybe, this is their pivot point where they say, all right, let's get out of this game. We haven't been super relevant for a really long time. You just never see them in the biggest of the conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious what they're going to shift, because like when you Google them, it comes up right on top, says intelligent security, period, everywhere. And then you go to the website.
Front page?
What's that?
On the front page?
On the Google search. So just on the Google front page search, it has like the index. That's what it says. And then, BlackBerry provides organizations and governments with software and services they need to secure the Internet of Things. And then you go to the page, and in the middle it says, BlackBerry cybersecurity driven by Cylance AI. Well, that's going away. So someone needs to update that page. I'm sorry?
That messaging is going to have to change slightly.
It's on the front page.
That's a big web rehaul. Yep, that's coming.
That's almost like a rebrand. Like, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a major section, actually, maybe even a major section of their page. And then they have QNX, like you said, mentioned in the bottom, but it still says security, performance and security.
Interesting.
Side note.
Yeah, it's end of an age.
Yeah.
It was weird when they did the acquisition, and, it continues to be weird.
Yeah. I think it's part of that's very interesting. By the way, side note, definitely check out the BlackBerry docudrama on HBO.
Docudrama, correct. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was a little disappointed that it didn't go to the point of like it didn't quite hit. I felt like it didn't go deep enough in some of the decisions that sunk them once they were competing with the iPhone. So there is a book that it's based on. I've got a copy of that book as well.
Nice.
And it really is an interesting history. I think it's worth diving into, like, why they made the choices they made. And it was an odd company too. Like they had co-CEOs for most of the company's history.
Yeah.
So every now and then you see a company, like I think Darktrace also has co-CEOs, two women, I believe. But yeah, super interesting. I love doing analysis, like not just on breaches, but also company failures and company mistakes. I've got a book on Segway. I've got a book on Xerox. That kind of chronicle like what happened, like where they they missed the mark, and they're all interesting for different reasons.
You probably like the Failery blog then.
Oh, that sounds like something to be up my alley. I don't know that I've seen that.
Failery, yeah, it's a graveyard of like companies of how they failed and stuff. So
I will definitely have to look that up. Okay. And thankfully, I'm about to have some free time.
There you go, some good reading.
Yeah, I'll try and find that later. We need to work through some of these items here before we move on. So number 3 is just a tool, but the reason it's in here is it's an AI-powered tool that you can plug into Burp to do some fuzzing. So interesting as we start to see, and this comes out of Dreadnought, which is like a AI pen testing company where they make AI red teaming tools. So they're building some interesting stuff. Their GitHub is worth a look. They've got some interesting stuff there. Number 4 is like it's Bob Lord every now and then posts some positive stuff, and this is one of those where he's just saying, "Hey, like we forgot to celebrate that we made everything HTTPS. Remember when everything was HTTPS? Like we kind of forgot to celebrate Let's Encrypt, and like it was incredible getting the whole internet encrypted because people push back on it. They're like, it's going to slow down my web server too much. Like there's too much overhead to do encryption. I can't buy certs for everything." And then Let's Encrypt came out and kind of pushed it over the finish line.
I still get pushback to this day.
Really?
I swear to God.
Wow.
I'm like, okay, this is fun. I'll take this exercise. We're like, why is, for example, encrypting buckets, buckets are not encrypted by default. And so you have to add a policy to encrypt them by default. And an engineer asks me, why do I need to do this? Like, what's the risk of this? I'm like, okay, well, man in the middle, Like, I'm like, okay, this is fine. And worked. So.
I mean, the truth is, I don't know. Like it's very academic risk though, right? Like the whole post encryption thing. I recently posted a rant on LinkedIn about Roger Grimes has a book called The Cryptography Apocalypse. I'm like, is this really that different from going from like TLS 1.1 to TLS 1.2? I mean, obviously it's a little bit different, but not that much. Like we're replacing first.
Sure.
We know how to do.
Yeah. I mean, everything should be risk-based, right? Like we shouldn't do things for the sake of doing things 100%. But
yeah. But you kind of have to do the encryption thing.
There's two sides. There's like, why should we do it? And like, what's expected of you? I'm sorry?
Like internally, maybe it's harder to argue that, right? Like if it's between two internal segments or something like that.
Well, now like with everybody accessing everything from everywhere, right?
Yeah. What's internal? Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. What's internal? Yeah. And even just an innocuous, even a public website, something innocuous as that, if an attacker wants to man in the middle of you and inject some code, a clear text. Anyway, it was interesting. It was a fun exercise, but yeah, it's great. I think Let's Encrypt was like a deal, like a game changer for everyone.
Yeah, it certainly was. There's a presentation at Black Hat that I think you can at least get the slides for it. I don't know if they recorded it, but somebody from Let's Encrypt was just going through some of the stats of like the amount of stuff that Let's Encrypt handles, which the scale of it's huge. Like the number of certificates that are generated and revoked and whatever every day is just staggering.
Do you remember when their CA expired and like broke the internet?
No, I forgot about that.
They had some issue and like, the internet was broken for like a few hours. So.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's scary. So let's see. Let's run through a couple of these real quick so we can get to the next segment here. Lastpass 2022 hack fallout continues. There are actually some numbers in here on how much cryptocurrency was stolen. So when all that happened, I was so hyper focused on how it happened and what was encrypted or not encrypted within Lastpass's product that I missed the motive and the attack motive for the thing, which seems to be stealing crypto, and was by any measure, I think pretty successful if you look at some of the numbers in here. So tens of millions of dollars of crypto was stolen as part of that hack, and apparently that fallout continues. So interesting that still seeing some ripples from this breach 2 years, almost 3 years later. There was also some drama on MITRE ATT&CK evaluations. So I've never been a huge fan of the MITRE ATT&CK evaluations. They're focused on EDR products. I'm always glad when somebody does some product testing because I feel like the industry really needs it. but the methodology is and how you present the results is always kind of tricky. And anytime you do any kind of scoring, vendors are going to try and gamify, the scores on that. You let the vendor set up the product. I have a problem with that as well. Of course, they can set it up perfectly. Like they know what they're setting it up for. They know what threat actor is going to be emulated in the test. So I kind of think I feel like there's no reason for anybody not to do perfectly on the assessment. And it was just kind of weird, like Cyber Reason had a perfect score. You're like, okay, like, like the organization best known for losing like the most value ever, aside from just talking about Cylance here, gets a perfect like okay, like how much value am I going to put on these scores if the company that clearly nobody with the product nobody wanted to buy, and had to lost all this value, gets a perfect score. There's a red flag here, but yeah, it's a LinkedIn post, and somebody from, I think it was Cynet, just complaining about some of the other vendors making all kinds of claims that the data doesn't support. It's just a mess. And I think this is a reason why in product reviews, you don't put a score on it. You record your experiences with the products, what the product can and can't do. But the moment you put like a 5-star, somebody gets 3 stars, somebody gets 5 stars or something like that, or, there's some kind of gamification aspect to it, it gets kind of toxic real quick.
Yeah, I think you had a post on LinkedIn talking about your scoring methodology.
Yeah. That's what. So this links to that, and that LinkedIn post is a like republish of the original one from the guy, CTO at Cynet, I think. And yeah, it's interesting because a lot of vendors really do want to get independent results of what their products can do out there. But it is tough to do a good job of these product reviews where, they can't be taken advantage of or misinterpreted, or as is often the case, the methodology tests the wrong thing, gets what's important to buyers wrong, which I think happens more often than not. Did with NSS Labs as well. And CrowdStrike pulled out of this test. That's never a good sign because they're usually game for this kind of thing too, unless they don't like the methodology, right, which is what happened with them and NSS Labs, which is why they sued NSS Labs, and which is why NSS Labs no longer exists and is now, I forget the new name that they incorporated under, but yeah,
the problem
continues to be a hot mess.
The problem is, and this isn't a cybersecurity relegated problem.
Right.
It's a human problem, is that everybody wants quick answers, and it's getting a lot worse as we're so technology driven. But everybody wants quick answers. Everybody wants a way to compare. Everybody wants the easy button to make choices, and they want some sort of checkbox to make sure they're doing the right thing. And there's nothing wrong with the checkbox to, CYA, basically. Yeah. And so if you're in the position to be picking a vendor, if you're, in an enterprise and you've got budget and your team has identified X, you want to be able to say, well, listen, this product was actually tested by an independent third party, and I made some decisions, and here's why, and here's what they found, and here's what I found, and, business justification. You still have to do that, but it always feels a little bit better when you have some backup data. The problem is that these are so, like you said, so easily manipulated, and rarely do these evaluations get updated based on lessons learned, based on how the market is changing. And again, not relegated to cybersecurity, it's across the board. If you read consumer reports for things, same thing. And there is no one size fits all for most things. There are some very bad things that we can say concretely in security, like, hey, this company never encrypts their data that they store for you, things like that. But in terms of use, so many tools have to be customized anyway, right? I mean, how many, quote, off-the-shelf tools do companies get that they then have to spend several months, a year, 2 years customizing to get it right for their environment? It's not uncommon. And a lot of that work, a lot of that input is dependent on the company. So you can't just say, ABC ranked this vendor number one, and so therefore it's safe, because, it's not just about the technology at the end of the day, but the human tendency is to want something that gives them the confidence, the courage, the support. But when it comes to cybersecurity, if there's no way to actually test it in your own environment, it's never going to be accurate.
Yeah, and then the other approach is crowdsourcing it. Like you see, Trust, whatever it's called, and G3, and then there's Gartner's peer reviews, peer insights.
Yeah,
I think they call it
yeah,
peer insight, which that can be
insights.
That's like you can tell in Glassdoor when the HR department requires employees to go say nice things so that they can pull up their rating on there. It's a problem everywhere you see it. Yeah. Everywhere you have some kind of review system or rating system, you run into these problems. And it's just because I've done it in the past, I have some very strong opinions here. But let's go ahead and wrap this up so we can get to the next segment, which is our last segment of the year. The last thing I want to mention, I wish we had more time to talk about it, is an essay here. This is from Mike Prevett at Return on Security about why every cybersecurity leader needs financial literacy. Maybe you have any thoughts on that, Eamon, before we wrap this segment?
Yeah, I was going to back channel you yesterday. I'm like, this is one article that I would love to talk about. I love this. It's funny, I didn't know it was Mike Prevett until I clicked on it. So thanks, Mike, for doing this. Yeah, it's and not only financial literacy, but business literacy, right? Like, so just at the basics, like understanding OpEx and CapEx, like he mentions, but also understanding where the business is, right? Like reading the room, basically, like reading the room. That's what he's saying, right? It's like you come in, and if the business is like, pre-PMF, product market fit, and trying to make some sales, end of quarter, like going crazy, and you're like, by the way, we should really look into, I don't know, SSO or something, that's like not aligned, not really a high priority for the business surviving, right? Thus, and your paycheck continuing.
But by the way, I need $1 million for something that will close 0 leads. Yeah.
Exactly. So you need to really have a good reading of the room, understand the business, a pulse, know these know what's going on, and not just be siloed off into your own, whatever cave. I want to find a gender neutral term, but office. But anyway.
I mean, if she or them could live in a cave, why not?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Fair.
All right, good stuff. Definitely check that one out, and stick around for part 2 of the news. We'll be right back with some forward-looking articles and our thoughts on next year.